The NFC South is typically written off as going to have one of the worst division champions who ends up losing early in the playoffs. But this year, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers might be better than people are expecting. Their offense going to have one of the most potent passing attacks in the NFL with Baker Mayfield at quarterback and a receiving core consisting of Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and their first round draft pick, Emeka Egbuka. I think Tampa Bay is going to be pretty scary on offense, pretty solid on defense, which makes them a threat to beat some of the top teams in the NFL. And they start off their season with back-to-back road trips. The first one Sunday against Atlanta and an in-division matchup to start the year. Typically, these are pretty close games within the NFC South, and I do think that the Falcons are going to give the Buccaneers a bit of a run. But they are going to be starting Michael Penix at quarterback, and for his first ever start to start the season, it might not go as well as Falcons fans are hoping. And I think Tampa Bay is going to end up getting the best of the Falcons in this one, really just going to be able to score more points than Atlanta.
Big thing here for the Falcons is that their defense has taken quite a hit in the offseason. Yes, they still have Jesse Bates as their star strong safety, but the defensive line is not nearly as good as it was last season. And on the flip side, the offensive line lost some key pieces as well in free agency. I do think the receiving core around Michael Penix is going to be very, very good with Drake London, Darnell Mooney, who is looking like he could have a potential breakout season. And of course, you have Kyle Pitts, who is always a dangerous person to have out there matchup wise. So if Michael Penix can be serviceable along with Bijan Robinson being one of the best running backs in the league, then the Falcons can make this close. But I do think the Buccaneers overall are just the better team, especially defensively. The following week is another road trip, like Jonas said. This time it is a primetime game on Monday night against the Texans. And the Texans are going to be another pretty good team. CJ Stroud back at quarterback after a little bit of a sophomore slump, but you can only consider it a slump considering how good his rookie year was. He was still a very, very good quarterback last season, despite having one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL. And while they did trade away Laramie Tunsil, who was the backbone of their offensive line for several years, they did go after a couple key offensive linemen in the draft. Granted, they might have been a little too late for some people like Jonah as a Texans fan, but I do think overall the Texans are going to be a little bit better. The real concern is going to be the wide receiver room as Stephon Diggs left in free agency. Tank Dell is most likely out for a majority of the season, if not the whole season, dealing with his injury from last year. They still have Nico Collins, Christian Kirk they got in the offseason, along with drafting both Iowa State wide receivers in the second round. So offensively, I do think the Texans are going to be fairly decent. And defensively, they still have a lot of great players. Will Anderson coming off the edge. Derek Stingley is one of the best corners in the league, a secondary that is overall very, very solid. But compared to what the Buccaneers are bringing, I do think there's a little bit more firepower. I think Baker is coming off of one of his best seasons in the NFL, putting up MVP caliber numbers last year. And I think this year, if his entire wide receiver room can stay healthy, particularly Chris Godwin, along with getting Emeka Ibuka, then this Buccaneers team is going to be very, very good. If Tristan Wirfs also stays healthy, then this offensive line is going to do a great job of protecting him. And if Hassan Reddick, for whatever reason, gets out of the funk he's been in for the last couple seasons after a really solid year as a Philadelphia Eagle, then this defense is going to be absolutely insane with the secondary they have as well with Antoine Winfield Jr. and with the draft picks they've made. This is going to be a very competitive and very entertaining Monday night game. But at the end of the day, I do think the Buccaneers have just the slight edge in a couple key places and will move to 2-0.
Yeah, even as a Texans fan, I do feel like early on in the season, this is a game that we very well could drop. The week after for the Buccaneers is going to be a matchup at home with the Jets. Justin Fields right now is dealing with a broken toe, but it looks like he's going to be fine when the season starts. So the Jets shouldn't have too much to worry about there. but still, I don't think they're going to be quite good enough in order to compete with this Buccaneers team. So I like Tampa Bay to bounce. uh, I like Tampa Bay to win this game, moving them to 3-0 before a really tough matchup at home with the Eagles. And Philadelphia just won the Super Bowl. They're going to be one of the best teams in the NFL again this season. Saquon Barkley, one of the best players in all of the NFL. And I mean, and they have Jalen Hurts at quarterback, A.J. Brown at wide receiver. The defense and the offensive line are also always both going to be very good. This is just a really tough Eagles team to beat. But like we said near the start of the video, the Buccaneers have the ability to match up against some of the better teams in the NFL very well. And while it seems crazy to say, I think Tampa Bay actually can defend the home field here and beat the Eagles. The defense is one of the few that I think can maybe slow down the Philadelphia offense just enough. And Tampa Bay has a solid passing attack. I think that they're going to be able to attack a very good Eagles secondary with all three of those wide receivers I mentioned earlier. This is just a scary passing attack, and I do believe that Tampa Bay has the ability to win this game.
Especially considering that Tampa Bay actually beat the Eagles last season in the same week as this season in week 4, and that was a road trip for the Buccaneers. So I think at home that they definitely have just as good of a chance. And if you are worried about the Eagles running the tush push or Saquon Barkley getting goal line carries, even though that is a very unlikely scenario, the Buccaneers did draft the tush push stopper in Desmond Watson, just an absolute behemoth that they can use to plug up the middle of the run lanes. So this could go either way, and this could backfire immensely if the Eagles are just the high-powered team. We saw them in the playoffs last year, just absolutely demolishing every team that they played. But I do think, like Jonah was saying, the Buccaneers have the potential to beat and compete with some of these top teams. Following week, they're back on the road, this time facing the Seattle Seahawks. And the Seahawks are bringing Sam Darnold to be the starting quarterback after he put up MVP caliber numbers last season in Minnesota. And now he's going to a little bit worse of a situation. Seattle also does not have a very successful offensive line and went after a lot of top tier offensive linemen in the draft, including getting the number one offensive guard in Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State. And outside of the offensive line issues, the Seahawks actually have a solid roster. If Sam Darnold plays the same, then the quarterback position shouldn't be as much of a concern. If Kenneth Walker coming back after dealing with some injuries last year, Jackson Smith-Njigba is coming off of his best season in the NFL. They also got Cooper Kupp during the offseason. While he has dealt with injuries, that is still a triple crown wide receiver now on your team, and he doesn't have to be the number one guy anymore because you have JSN. And defensively, they still have some solid players. Leonard Williams is one of the better defensive linemen in the NFL. The secondary with Devon Witherspoon, Kobe Bryant, Rick Woolen are very, very solid. And the Seahawks team has one of the best home field environments in the NFL, one of the loudest stadiums in the country. And I think after a huge win for the Buccaneers against the Eagles, they might falter just a little bit on the road here against the Seahawks. So we are going to have them dropping this game, even though they might actually be a slightly better team than the Seahawks. I do think the Seahawks have a potential to pull off an upset in this game, assuming Sam Darnold is the same quarterback that we saw him in Minnesota as.
And then it's back home to face the San Francisco 49ers. Long road trip for San Francisco. This one, I really think Tampa Bay is the better team overall, but the 49ers are going to be able to win some football games next year. They still have Brock Purdy, they still have George Kittle, even though their whole wide receiver room is absolutely chaotic with Brandon Ayuk trying to get a trade and Jawan Jennings wanting a new contract and Ricky Pearsall recovering from being shot. The 49ers should still be a decent team. I don't think they're going to have much of a chance in the NFC West, but they still have the ability to beat some pretty solid teams like the Buccaneers. And starting off 5-1 seems very strong for Tampa Bay. I think after losing a game to Seattle, they're going to be coming back home, kind of expecting to get a win over a 49ers team that isn't as good this season. Maybe look ahead to a road trip to Detroit a little bit the next week. And they're going to end up dropping this game to San Francisco as well. And then it's that matchup with the Detroit Lions, one of the best teams in the NFL once again this season. I don't even know where to get started with this team. It's very similar to the Eagles. Their offense is going to be incredible. The defense always going to be very solid. And they have one of the most unpredictable coaches in all of football in Dan Campbell. I think that Detroit's going to be really good again this year. And I really would be shocked if the Buccaneers were able to pull off this upset. Being on the road definitely makes it a lot tougher. I think they'll make it a little bit closer than people expect, but really this is a game that the Lions should win, which will drop Tampa Bay down to 4-3.
And I think the Lions have a little bit of revenge on their mind considering the Buccaneers beat them last season. It's kind of similar to the Eagles, two of the best teams in the NFC last season. The Buccaneers were able to take them down early on. I think at home for the Lions, even with the departure of Ben Johnson, I think this Lions team is still going to be very, very good, especially with the return of Aiden Hutchinson on the defensive line. Even though it was such a serious leg injury, if he's able to come back 100% or at least close to 100%, then this Detroit defensive line gets so much better and might be able to stop this high-powered Buccaneers offense. The following game is another divisional game. This time it is a road trip to face the Saints. And quite frankly, the Saints are probably the worst team in the NFL going into next season. The quarterback room is a mess. They drafted Tyler Shuff in the second round of the NFL draft along with already having Spencer Rattler. And in the third option, I don't even know who he is, but I would doubt he's even in consideration at this point. But Spencer Rattler and Tyler Shuff are not going to win you very many football games. You honestly have a better chance of winning the game if you start Taysom Hill at quarterback. But outside of that, this Saints team doesn't have a whole lot going for them, especially now when you consider Marshawn Lattimore is no longer on the team and he was the Mike Evans slash Buccaneers stopper. With him gone, the Saints team really doesn't have a whole lot going for them. Tyrann Mathieu also just recently retired, so that is another loss in the secondary. They still have Justin Reed, Kool-Aid McKinstry, who can be solid players in the secondary, but this team is just not able to compete with the likes of the Buccaneers here. So the Buccaneers will get back in the win column here, moving to 2-0 in the division and 5-3 overall before their bye week. And out of that bye week, they will host the New England Patriots. And the Patriots, I think, are actually going to be a pretty solid team. Now, they do have a lot of youth and new players coming into the organization. Drake May is obviously their starting quarterback after a really solid rookie season after he started the season on the bench. Stephon Diggs is coming in to help out in the wide receiver room that has struggled in the past few years. Ramondre Stevenson hopefully able to bounce back after a pretty lackluster season. And this offensive line is really solid, especially with the addition of Will Campbell, who was their first round pick. Defensively, the linebackers and defensive line might not be as strong as they have been in the past, particularly with Matthew Judon no longer on the team. But the secondary, on the other hand, is looking very, very strong. Christian Gonzalez, as their number one corner, has looked very, very good. Jabril Peppers has had flashes in his NFL career. Carlton Davis is also a very solid cornerback as well. I think the Patriots have a lot of potential and could surprise some people. Not saying they're going to compete with the Bills for an AFC East title, but can make games close, especially against teams like the Buccaneers. But I do think with the bye week before this game and with a more high-powered offense, the Buccaneers should be able to get a win over the Patriots, but in a much closer game than some people might think.
And then it's a road trip to the Bills, who Connor was just talking about a little bit there in that Patriots game. And I think that the Bills are going to be a really solid team once again. You have the defending yet controversial MVP in Josh Allen. And just all around, this is a really good Bills team. And I think they're going to be one of the best teams in the AFC. This is a game that the Buccaneers really would want to win, but it's not one that their fans should expect them to, I don't think. Like we've been saying all along, they're a really good team, and they have the ability to beat some really good teams as well. So far, they've split one win against the Eagles, one loss against the Lions. And the crazy thing here is that we are actually going to take Tampa Bay to win this game and move to 7-3 against a really good Bills team. This one, I think, is going to be close no matter what, which means it really can go either way. But I just really like this Tampa Bay team and how well they match up against some of the better teams in the NFL. The key for me is really going to be Baker Mayfield and his weapons to throw to. He has the potential to have some crazy stats this season.
And with this Bills game too, obviously Josh Allen has had pretty lackluster wide receiver rooms in the past few years. Stephon Diggs has been his best wide receiver in his NFL career, but his second and third string wide receivers have not always been that strong. Now with Stephon Diggs gone, the wide receiver room is quite honestly pretty lackluster. Khalil Shakir is their number one wide receiver. Keon Coleman showed some flashes, but is still pretty young, and then Joshua Palmer as their number three wide receiver. Comparing that wide receiver room to one of Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Emeka Ibuka is just night and day. And while Josh Allen could just put the team on his back, especially with James Cook in the backfield, and will this Bills team to a win, especially at home. I do think the Buccaneers just have a more solid or complete team compared to the Bills having maybe some better players at some positions, but not as good players or significantly worse players than what the Bucks have. So could go either way, like Jonah was saying, but I do think that the Buccaneers have a chance here. They are on the road the following week, back in a primetime game, this time against the Rams. And the Rams are going to be a great team once again. Most likely the best team in the NFC West. Matthew Stafford back as the starting quarterback after a pretty solid year. We mentioned with the Seahawks that Cooper Kupp is now part of Seattle and no longer on the Rams, which means Puka Nacua has his time to step up and be the lead wide receiver. And he might have a lot more opportunities to succeed, considering that the Rams also got Devontae Adams. While he is not the same wide receiver we know from the past because he is a little bit older, he is still one of the best route runners in the NFL and will be able to take some of that pressure off of Puka Nacua. Defensively, you're returning some of the best rookie defensive linemen in the NFL from last year. Braden Fisk, Jared Verse, not to mention Kobe Turner, Byron Young on the defensive line as well. The only issue is going to be their secondary, which, like we've already mentioned 100 times with this Buccaneers team, their wide receivers are very, very good. But I think this defensive line that the Rams have is going to be able to cause some issues for this Buccaneers offense. And back-to-back road trips against some of the best teams in the NFL, I don't think they're going to be able to win both of them. So Tampa Bay will drop this game to the Rams to fall to 7-4.
And then it's a matchup with the Cardinals, who, if any team is going to win the NFC West other than the Rams, I personally think it will be the Cardinals. They're coming into the year pretty underrated, honestly. Kyler Murray back at quarterback, and I think Marvin Harrison Jr. in his second season in the NFL should improve quite a bit. Just all around, the Cardinals have a really solid team. And I think that they have the ability, just like the Rams, to play the Buccaneers very, very close. And even though the Buccaneers are at home here, someone's telling me that the Cardinals are going to give them a run for their money. And like I said, it's going to be really close, But I really like this Cardinals offense for this year. I think that they're going to be able to put up enough points to match this Buccaneers offense. Might be a high-scoring shootout, lots of passing yards on both sides, but I like the Cardinals here to continue to slow down the Buccaneers' momentum. Now, unfortunately for the rest of the NFL, the Buccaneers' momentum won't be slowed much longer because they have the Saints the next week. I don't really see any way the Saints end up winning either of these two games against the Bucks this year. Tampa Bay at home should get a very easy bounce back win, moving them to 8-5, and with the finish they have to the season, it puts them in a pretty good spot to make the playoffs.
And that last stretch of games starts with a Thursday night game against the Falcons. And Jonah already talked a lot about the Falcons, and I mentioned how the defense has lost a good amount of their best players from last year. But the NFC South is one of those divisions where all the teams in the division tend to beat up on each other, and that's why we always see it with a close finish towards the end of the season, with all the teams kind of around the same record. And I think this year is going to be the same scenario. There's going to be no exceptions to that rule. And I think in game 2, the Falcons will have a better chance to beat the Buccaneers, even if it is a road game. I think at this point in the season, Michael Penix is a lot more comfortable, even though he did have starting experience last season when he came in for a benched Kirk Cousins. But I think with a full season under his belt as the starter, this is where I think the Falcons start to turn it around a little bit and will be able to beat the Buccaneers on the road here. And then the following week is a road trip against the Panthers. And yes, the Panthers have been one of the worst teams in the NFL the past few years. But I think things are starting to turn around for Carolina. Bryce Young started to look a lot better through the second half of last year after getting benched towards the first couple weeks for Andy Dalton. And I think that the organization has started to build a lot more around him, considering their first round pick was getting a really, really good weapon for Bryce Young in Tataroa McMillan out of Arizona. They still have Adam Thielen, who has been a reliable wide receiver for his entire NFL career. The offensive line still looks pretty decent, maybe not one of the best in the NFL, but solid enough to protect Bryce Young. And then defensively, they went out and got some great edge rushers, including Nick Scorton from Texas A&M. I think the secondary is also going to take some steps forward, as we saw J.C. Horn was one of the better defensive backs in the NFL last year after struggling through his first couple seasons. I think this Panthers team might surprise some people. I'm not saying they're really going to be front runners in the NFC South, but I do think they're going to be a lot more competitive than we saw them the past few years. We saw towards the end of last year, they started to compete more in close games, even giving the Chiefs a scare. But I do think this is where the Panthers can get a win, especially since it's a road trip for Tampa Bay. This will drop the Buccaneers to 8-7 with a loss to the Panthers before their last two games of the season.
And the first of those two is a road trip to Miami. In this one, I really think the Buccaneers should be the favorites. Miami is, I don't think, going to be nearly as good this season. They have some talented players on the roster, but they're all just so injury prone that it would be shocking if they can go the entire season without having anybody go down. We've seen Tua struggle with concussions the past few seasons. Tyreek Hill, while he's one of the fastest players in the NFL, is also one of the most injury prone players. Just really, I think the Buccaneers are more talented than the Dolphins as a team. But when you throw in the fact that the Dolphins likely will not be at full strength coming into this game, even though they're at home, I really think the Buccaneers are the better team and should be able to bounce back into the win column here before a rematch with the Panthers to close out the season. This game is going to be very important for making the playoffs, but I think that in game 2, kind of like we saw the Falcons be able to play the Buccaneers closer in game 2, I think the Buccaneers are going to have a really good chance to get revenge on Bryce Young and the Panthers, this time at home as well. and to close out the season with a playoff spot potentially on the line, I think Tampa Bay is going to get it done, no question. Shouldn't be nearly as close as the first one was either. Buccaneers will get back into the win column and win the division at 10-7, which is the exact same record that they had last season. And we have their floor this year as 7-10. Really, I still think they're going to be the most talented team in the NFC South. There are maybe other teams, if the Panthers have a really good season this year, like they were maybe starting to do at the end of last year, I could see the Panthers winning the division potentially. Even the Falcons could maybe make a push. The only one that I'm not confident in would be the Saints. They should be pretty comfortable sitting there in last place. The ceiling for the Buccaneers, way up there at 13-4. I think everybody would be shocked if an NFC South team went 13-4 this season because of what we're used to seeing from that division. 10 wins typically ends up being the max. I think that's much more likely this year. The Vegas over-under at 9.5, just slightly favoring the under. 9-8 would be just about right for an NFC South champion. That's what we have gotten accustomed to seeing. But we are predicting a 10-7 season for Tampa Bay.
And this really just comes down to if this Tampa Bay team is as good as we think they're going to be, considering how difficult their schedule is. The 7-10 floor is if they end up losing games to the Texans, the Eagles, and the Bills, which would drop them to that 7-10 record. But a 13-4 season would be beating the really good teams that we had them losing to, like the Lions, like the Rams, and then probably picking up a game over the Falcons or Panthers along the way. So the sky's the limit really for this Buccaneers team, especially with the great draft class they're bringing in. But I do think, given how difficult the schedule is, splitting those really tough games is the most likely outcome considering how well Baker played last season, and we think he will have continued success in this Buccaneers offense.
And that's the last point that I really wanted to hit on is Baker Mayfield specifically. I think the key for the Buccaneers, maybe even hitting that 13-4 ceiling, is his decision making because he has some of the best route running wide receivers in the NFL. If he can really hone in on them specifically and not throwing interceptions, if he keeps the turnovers to a minimum, not only can he have some ridiculous numbers this season, Baker Mayfield could potentially have an MVP level season just because of the talent at the wide receiver position he has to throw to. Limiting turnovers is going to be the key for Tampa Bay this season. So, thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video.